Okay, so next I want to talk about the value of cumulative recovery. One of the biggest mistakes that clients and professionals alike make is putting an inordinate value on the length of continuous sobriety. And I say that because it's a linear mindset. Here comes another Facebook meme. What you want is depicted in the Facebook meme as this nice straight arrow that continuously goes up. And what you get in any type of recovery or transformative process is this impossible, convoluted mess that slowly goes up, but in a very circular fashion. When a person relapses or they have failed to continue their progress or they've had some regression or setback, they most often tell me that they've lost everything or that they're starting all over. And I've learned over and over again that that simply isn't true. Whatever growth or learning or healing a person experiences typically is not undone in any meaningful way when they relapse. Sometimes I hear the expression that relapse is part of recovery. I understand the sentiment behind that. I disagree. I don't think relapse has to be part of recovery. It just oftentimes is. So, helping a person look for patterns in relapse is extraordinarily important. I think it behooves us to be cheerleaders. We're constantly rooting for our clients, we're constantly highlighting their successes. Because when you work with people in any kind of recovery process, whether it's addiction or otherwise, I think what you're going to find is that the people you serve are not a fair judge of themselves, and the way that they evaluate their process and their progress is fundamentally different than the way that they would see it if it were another person. And that's actually a question that I routinely ask my clients is, how would you see this if it was somebody else's life? If it was a friend or a family member or anybody that you care about, how would you see it? And quite often, that depersonalization process allows them to see things in a fundamentally different perspective that's conducive to their own healing. So, when I think about accumulative recovery, one of the most common patterns that I see is a 1 month, 3 month, or 6 month pattern that keeps recurring. And I think those are significant because quite often what they really represent is the length of time that a person can endure alone, the degree to which they can white knuckle their way through recovery. And so, what I most often find is that those folks need to introduce greater support, greater accountability, um, greater degrees of interaction with people who themselves are in recovery to really help them stay more continuously abstinent, to help them reach new goals. Going through any of these change processes alone is a dubious undertaking at best, and very often it's frankly dangerous. It's not something that I would wish on anyone. And so, the opportunity, or one of the many opportunities here, is to consider very basically, how does the person we're serving deal with fear? And my experience is the way in which we choose to cope and work through our fears determines really the lion's share of what's possible in our lives. I always want to open doors for those I serve, so I constantly use myself as an example. And what I'll say is everything that I am pursuing, everything that I believe my higher power wants for me, is outside of my current comfort zone. And I'm always going to be able to find a way to rationalize not doing the thing that scares me. So as I introduce greater levels of support, I get encouragement and reassurance, but I also get accountability. When I share what my fears are, they're less able to run me and restrict me, and I have accountability for facing them in ways that are healthy for me. Everything else tends to be overwhelming, and when we're overwhelmed, we go back to our most basic instincts. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, that means drinking or using. So, finding value in all of our efforts, finding value in all of our progress, no matter how small that step may have been, is intrinsically valuable. It's something that we can build on. It's identifying patterns, ways to break them. It's looking at all of the ways in which we complicate our lives. I say to people all the time, the only thing that it takes to break a pattern is to do something differently. So let's look at what you're going to do differently this time. And let's consider that when you're beating yourself up, whether it's for a relapse or some other form of regression, what you're effectively saying is, I'm not going to change today because I'm too busy shaming myself for having made mistakes, for having self-destructed. And that too locks us into an unhealthy pattern. So I'm not saying to people that you should give yourself a pass. I am saying, let's acknowledge it, let's take responsibility for it, and then let's focus on what are the solutions and what am I going to do differently. I don't really want to discourage anybody, but I do notice that we talk in euphemisms a lot, especially in early recovery. We talk about having a slip or falling off the wagon. And so I don't tolerate euphemisms. I say to folks, look, if we can't say what it really is, then what are the chances we're going to change it? The most common thing I hear from people is, I fucked up. And I'll say, okay, tell me specifically what that is so that it doesn't have to be something that continues to limit you. Tell me what that is and how it is that that's going to change so that we can achieve a better result. But always place value on every lesson learned, every period of abstinence, because all of it has value, and cumulatively it adds up to the type of change and transformation that we're seeking.